Hi there, I'm Wendy. And this is the story of the day my own parents smiled and told me I had 30 days to move out of the home I built, brick by brick, with my grandmother. The same home where I gave up years of my life to care for her. They sold it, behind my back. But what came next was worse. Why do families erase the ones who never stopped showing up? Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt like the one who gave the most and still ended up on the outside. It was raining again, the kind that came without warning, soft, steady, and indifferent. My kitchen window blurred with droplets while the scent of cinnamon and lemon glaze filled the room. I was finishing a batch of scones for the neighborhood fundraiser. Hands dusted in flour, apron tied loosely. This kitchen had seen the worst and best of me, and it still held me when no one else would. I didn't hear the front door open, but I heard the heels, sharp and deliberate, against the old pine floor. Lorraine didn't believe in knocking. She never had. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, voice sugar-coated and wrong. She was followed by Raymond and Delaney, both soaked at the shoulders but quiet. Delaney tried a half smile. Raymond stared at the ceiling like he didn't know how to be in a room with me anymore. I wiped my hands and motioned toward the kettle. "Tea?" "No need," Lorraine said, already pulling a folder from her oversized purse. "This won't take long." The silence in the room stretched as she smoothed the papers out on the island. Her lipstick was too perfect for the weather. "You have 30 days to move out," she said, like it was a line from a TV drama. "The house is now Raymond's." I didn't speak, didn't flinch. I stared at the folder as if it might evaporate under the heat of my gaze. Raymond shifted his weight, cleared his throat. Delaney looked at her shoes. "This is for the best," Lorraine continued, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Raymond and Delaney are starting a family. You're always traveling for those events. It's time someone made better use of the place." I blinked, then nodded once. "Is this a joke?" "You know we kept our names on the deed," she replied gently, patting the folder like it was a baby she adored. "Just for tax purposes. It's not personal." Not personal. I looked around the room, at the cabinets I installed with my own hands, the paint I chose with Grandma Margaret after 2 glasses of wine, the table I sanded every spring. I had poured my bones into this place. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I let them talk. Later that night, I found myself replaying moments like photographs. Most clearly, the family gathering just 2 weeks ago, Grandma's memorial. I had brought my peach cobbler. Everyone had praised it, like they always did. When it came time for the group photo, Lorraine had tilted her head, squinted, and said, "Sweetheart, maybe stand a little to the left. That's better for the frame." I had smiled, obeyed. The photo went up the next day on Lorraine's Facebook. Everyone looked lovely. Except I wasn't in it. I had been cropped out. It wasn't the cropping that hurt. It was the effort it must have taken to pretend I had never been there. Back in the present, I rinsed the cup Lorraine had barely sipped from. Placed it back in the cupboard like she might one day return for it. Then I walked over to the drawer by the hallway, the second one from the top, the one that stuck slightly when it rained. Inside was an envelope, cream-colored, with my grandmother's initials in cursive gold, M.A. I hadn't opened it since the day she pressed it into my hand. "I didn't know it then," I whispered, fingers tracing the edges. "But that was the moment I stopped trying to belong to them. Let them think I'm packing. I'm preparing." I didn't sleep that night. The rain had stopped, but its weight clung to the walls like a memory refusing to dry. I sat in the kitchen long after they left, my fingers idly tracing the rim of the teacup Lorraine never finished. The scent of cinnamon had faded into something bitter, something burnt. I opened my phone, not because I wanted to, but because habit has a way of dragging you back into the places that hurt. The first post on my feed was the family photo from Grandma Margaret's memorial. Everyone looked so perfectly posed. I remembered the moment, the push to the side, the fake laugh, the instructions for symmetry. I wasn't in it. For a second, I wondered if I had stepped away too early. Maybe I was in the bathroom. Maybe I had blinked and they'd cropped me for aesthetic. But then my phone buzzed. A text from Delaney. "Here's the full version. I figured you'd want it." There I was, Not just in the frame, centered. My arm around Delaney, smiling, alive. They had cut me out deliberately. I stared at both versions for a long time. I didn't cry, I didn't curse. I just saved them into a new folder on my desktop. Proof of pattern. It wasn't just a photo. It was the first confirmation that this wasn't negligence. This was strategy. At brunch the next day, Lorraine had already shifted into performance mode. The air was thick with honeyed lies and half-laughs. I was serving scones, my scones, from a plate she introduced as store-bought but still cute. Then I heard her, whispering to Aunt Claudette, as if I'd vanished. She left New York because her fiancé dumped her. Poor thing never really got over it. My stomach knotted. She said it so casually, as if it were a quirky fact, not a violation. I'd never told her why I left. I never told anyone but Grandma. That break had shattered more than my heart. It cracked something fundamental in me, and Lorraine had repackaged it as gossip. Claudette looked at me with pity. I hated that look more than I hated the lie. I left early. Back in my apartment, I pulled out an old shoebox from the closet. Inside were letters, photos, and one snapshot of me and him, smiling on a Brooklyn rooftop. I tore it in half without ceremony. Then I found a note from Grandma folded between 2 pages of an old recipe book. What they see in you will always threaten what they lack. I read it 3 times. Then I began to build, folder by folder, document by document, emails, property records, photos, cropped and uncropped, audio messages, voicemails, everything. I didn't know what I would do with it all, but I knew I needed it. At midnight, I was still at my desk. The only light in the room came from the laptop screen. A new folder sat on my desktop. It was named Control. They've cut me out before. Next time, they won't even get to hold the scissors. The drawer stuck, like always. A little tug, then the give. Dust lifted in the early light, catching in the air like memories waiting to land. I wasn't even looking for anything in particular. Just something to hold on to, I think. Instead, I found the note. It was sealed in thick ivory paper, brittle at the edges, addressed in Grandma Margaret's handwriting. I hadn't opened it since the day she left it tucked between the cookbooks. Maybe part of me was afraid of what it might ask of me, or confirm. Before I could slip a finger beneath the flap, a knock broke the silence. It was Delaney. Her hands were shaking, shoulders hunched like a child about to admit she broke something valuable. I shouldn't be here, she whispered, but I found something. She pulled out her phone and tapped it nervously, then handed it to me. An email, forwarded, from Lorraine. She's emotionally unstable and not in a place to handle property responsibilities, it read. Let's not drag this out. My name was in the subject line. I was the subject line. I read it 3 times, then handed the phone back. Do you want me to delete it? Delaney asked. I shook my head. There wasn't anything to say, not yet. But something settled in my chest that hadn't been there before. Not pain, not rage, just clarity. The next morning, Lorraine returned. This time she brought Raymond. She didn't knock either. She stepped into my kitchen like she still owned the walls. Raymond stood beside her like furniture, present but unimportant. Raymond needs a more professional space to meet with clients, she said, pouring herself tea like it was her housewarming. The downstairs kitchen is too underutilized. You could easily move your baking stuff upstairs, right? I smiled, nodded. It was easier that way. As they walked through the back door, I watched Raymond trail his fingers along the tile counter I had laid by hand. Lorraine didn't see me grip the edge of the sink. Later, I stood in the now empty kitchen. My kitchen. I remembered Grandma's voice, echoing behind the sizzle of butter in the pan. Anything worth keeping, you build twice. First with your hands, then with your heart. I whispered those words into the stillness, and then I grabbed my phone. I took photos, every angle, every corner. I labeled the folder before, not before he moved in, before they tried to erase me. Back upstairs, I printed the email Delaney had shown me, slipped it into a manila folder labeled Truth. I added it to the others, receipts, deeds, contracts, voicemails, a copy of the family photo, cropped and uncropped. Brick by brick, I was building something. They thought I was disappearing, but I was documenting. By nightfall, I found myself on the floor of the old kitchen, knees pulled to my chest, the scent of dried thyme still in the grout lines. They think they're building a future, I whispered into the dark. But they're chiseling away a grave. The brunch was already in full swing when I arrived. Late. Intentionally. Lorraine was holding court at the head of the table, her gold bracelets clinking every time she reached for the coffee pot. Raymond and Delaney were seated side by side, her posture rigid, his legs stretched too wide under the table like he owned more than just the chair. I took the only open seat, next to them. The talk was light at first. The weather, someone's new promotion, a cousin's engagement. Then, as it always did, the air shifted. Raymond leaned forward, elbows on the table, a confident grin playing at his lips. "We've been thinking about remodeling the downstairs unit," he said casually, as if the walls hadn't already been shaped by my hands. Delaney stared at her water glass. "Maybe open it up, make it more modern, something clients would actually want to walk into." He chuckled. Lorraine nodded. "He has vision," she said. "You were always more hands-on, Wendy." I reached for a roll. My fingers touched the bread knife instead. Then he said it. "The baker in residence, just holding the place down until we get the real plan rolling." Laughter, not loud, just enough to cut. My throat closed. The roll stayed untouched. Not even the food tasted like it used to. I excused myself before dessert. I didn't look back. Delaney followed me to the porch but said nothing. Just stood there, chewing her lip, like silence might undo what had been said. I went home and opened the kitchen drawer where I kept my aprons. Folded the one I'd worn earlier and placed it inside. It felt like lowering a flag I never meant to surrender. The next morning, I called the bank. There had been another leak in the roof, the same corner that had always leaked, since before Grandma passed. I figured I'd request the repair funds from the joint account she set up, but the banker hesitated. "You're no longer on that account, Miss Arquette. You were removed 3 weeks ago." Removed. My name, my presence, my right. Gone. I thanked her, hung up, and sat down on the steps outside. The sky was too bright for the way my stomach turned. In my mind, I saw Grandma and me during that storm when the ceiling first gave out. We'd stood under the drip with a bucket between us, laughing like the house was teasing us. "If they take from you once," she had whispered, pressing a towel to the floor, "they'll keep taking until you say stop." And they were taking. Not just space or money, but words. Stories. Truth. I pulled out the email Delaney had printed for me, the banking paperwork, the cropped photo. I began lining up the dates. Patterns started to form. Overlaps, intentions. This wasn't about a house anymore. It was a campaign. That night, I called Stuart Linwood. "Not to file anything," I told him, voice low. "Just review some ownership questions." But I knew what I was really asking. Later, I sat in the dark with my phone in hand, pressed record. "They've started writing me out of the story," I whispered, "so I'm writing one they can't edit." The bank was too cold, too clean, the kind of place where silence wasn't peace, it was policy. I hadn't planned to come, but I woke up with a weight in my chest I couldn't shake, and something inside whispered, "Go." The teller wore a name badge that read Lucy in cheerful script. I handed her my ID and asked for the most recent signature authorization forms tied to the home repair account. She hesitated, scanned the screen, then excused herself to the back. I watched the clock tick. Every second pulled tight. When she returned, she placed a folder on the counter with 2 clipped pages inside. I thanked her, stepped outside, and sat on the concrete bench beneath the rusted town flagpole. The signature was dated 3 days after Grandma Margaret died. Of course she did. Lorraine always preferred paperwork over conversation, easier to control the narrative when it couldn't talk back. The family dinner came that weekend. Lorraine called it casual, but she never hosted anything without an agenda. The long table was set with linen napkins and too many forks. Raymond talked about renovating the lower unit again. Delaney barely touched her wine. I waited. And when the noise lulled into silverware and murmurs, I asked, "When was the last time anyone updated the repair account paperwork?" Lorraine didn't look up from her plate. "You were just helping out, Wendy." she said, as if I'd forgotten. You were never meant to keep the house. You were holding it for Raymond. The room fell into a silence, so sudden it sounded like impact. A fork dropped. Claudette blinked. Raymond coughed into his napkin. I pushed my chair back just enough to feel the shift, but I didn't leave. Inside, I wanted to scream. But instead, I watched her, watched how easily she twisted the truth, like it had always belonged to her. I was not holding it for Raymond. I was holding it together for all of them. The memory came without permission. A stormy night. The power knocked out. Grandma and I lighting candles, patching leaks, boiling water over the gas flame. "This house isn't made of bricks," she had said, holding a flashlight under her chin like a child telling a ghost story. "It's made of what we survive." I took that quote and wrote it in ink on a yellow sticky note. I stuck it inside the folder, labeled Truth. That afternoon, I met Stuart Linwood at his office. He poured coffee without asking, and didn't smile when I slid the forged document across the desk. "I think it's time we start organizing my side of the story," I said. He nodded. No surprise, just acceptance, like he'd been waiting for me to catch up to my own worth. By nightfall, I was home. I lit a single candle and placed it between two documents, the fake and the real. Lorraine's version of the truth, and the one Grandma had signed long before illness made her handwriting wobble. They're playing with fire. I'm just choosing where the match lands. Delaney showed up without calling. She never did that. It was late, the bakery dark except for the amber under-cabinet lights. I was wiping down the counters in silence, the kind of motion you do when you're too full to speak. She stood at the doorway, her hands trembling slightly, her face pale. "I didn't plan this," she said, "but you need to hear it." She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. The audio began with background clinks, probably coffee mugs, and then Lorraine's voice, clear and sharp. "It's fine. Let her stay until we're ready. She's just keeping it warm." The words were surgical. I didn't ask where or when. I didn't ask why she recorded it. I just reached out, took the phone, replayed the clip once, then handed it back. "Thank you," I said, without meeting her eyes. She left as quietly as she came. Downstairs, the kitchen sat colder than I remembered, stripped of the shelves I'd taken down, the scents that once belonged to it now living in memory. Grandma had stood by those windows, whistling out of tune while cleaning the panes with vinegar and newspaper. Her laugh echoed even in silence. They never saw me as the owner, just a warm body with keys. Back upstairs, I typed out the transcript word for word and printed 2 copies. One went into the folder I now labeled Intent. The other, I tucked under my pillow. The next envelope came from the city, innocently delivered with junk mail. Zoning application confirmation. Duval Partners, LLC. I read the name twice. Then again. I didn't own an LLC, but Raymond did. And according to the form, he'd applied to turn the downstairs unit into a co-working space, submitted with a copy of building ownership. The name on the document wasn't mine. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood, walked outside barefoot, and let the cold porch slap some breath back into me. The next morning, I drove to Lorraine's brunch without RSVP. I walked in with the envelope still sealed, sat across from her without a hello, dropped it on the table between her fork and her coffee. She opened it, skimmed. "You're overreacting," she said with a laugh too light to be real. "It's just a proposal." I leaned forward. "You're building something on a foundation you don't own." She blinked, like it wasn't what she expected me to say. Then I stood, still calm. I didn't stay for the meal. I didn't ask for support. Back home, my phone rang before I even took off my shoes. It was Stuart. "We need to talk," he said. "Now." I sat on the kitchen floor, the documents in my lap, the air too still. They pushed first. I'm just pushing back, with documents. The call came just past midnight. I was in the bakery going over invoices, trying to track down a missing shipment of sugar, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, I let those ring out, but something about the timing made me answer. "Wendy Arquette?" the voice asked, smooth and confident. "Yes," I replied, cautious. "This is Alex Stellan. I'm a partner with Duval Partners, LLC. Just wanted to touch base before we finalize the co-investment agreement for the downstairs co-working space." I didn't speak for 3 full seconds. Then, "What investment?" He hesitated. Raymond mentioned you might be out of the loop. He emailed me the draft. I opened it on my laptop, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. It was a contract, a signed agreement, the downstairs unit as collateral under a business registered without my knowledge, my address, my name, my home. The walls of the bakery suddenly felt tighter. This wasn't just betrayal. This was attempted theft. I printed the contract, slipped it into the folder, walked to the hallway that connected my apartment to Raymond's and stood there, outside his door. I could hear him laughing inside. The sound curled like smoke under the door. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. The next morning, Delaney showed up at my door, holding a small USB. "I thought it was mine," she said, not meeting my eyes. "But it's not." Inside were 2 files. One was a PDF of Grandma Margaret's will. Except the signature was off. The date, too. She'd been in the hospital when it was supposedly signed, barely coherent. The second file was a Word document, titled draft_revision_V4_final.docs. My breath left my body in one long, quiet release. I brought the drive to Stuart Linwood. He didn't say much at first, just stared at the screen, then turned to me slowly. "They forged her will," he said, "and they did it well." I sat across from him, still, no tears, no fury. "They wrote me out of my own bloodline," I said softly. "So now I'll rewrite everything." That night, I opened a blank document. Title: The Real Inheritance. Then I opened my email and drafted a cease and desist letter to Alex Stellan. I was no longer collecting proof. I was building a wall out of it. They thought this was war. I was just getting ready for it. If truth is paper, I'll use it to build my walls. Delaney sat on the edge of my couch like she wasn't sure whether to stay or run. The room was dim, lit only by the small amber glow of a salt lamp in the corner. Her hands were clenched, her voice so low I had to lean in to hear her. "There's something I need to say," she began. I nodded once, not trusting myself to speak. A few months before she passed, Lorraine asked me to help her practice Grandma's signature. She said it was for a memory quilt. Something sentimental. I didn't think... She stopped, swallowing hard. I didn't think it mattered. I let the words sit in the air between us. They didn't surprise me. Not after everything. Not anymore. I didn't offer comfort. I just looked out the window, where the magnolia trees swayed gently in the breeze. They rehearsed my erasure in whispers, and she played along. But now, she was here. "I'll testify if you need me to," Delaney added quietly. I nodded again. When she left, I walked into Grandma's old bedroom. It still smelled faintly of lavender and lemon balm. The same curtains, the same creak in the floorboard near the dresser. I opened the cedar box beneath the bed. It was labeled Legacy in Grandma's neat cursive. Inside were the letters, the Bible with her scribbled margin notes, and the USB I had once hidden in denial. I brought it to my laptop and pressed play. There she was, her voice a little thinner than I remembered, but clear. "This house is Wendy's. I want her to have it fully. She earned it, not just by blood, but by presence." The next day, Lorraine called a family meeting, said it was time to clear the air. They were all there. The long dining room table felt colder than usual. Raymond looked tired. Delaney sat close to the wall. Earl didn't meet my gaze. I walked in late, laptop in one hand, small speaker in the other. I didn't greet anyone. I didn't ask permission. I just pressed play. Margaret Arquette's voice filled the room. Every word a stone thrown through the stained glass version of truth Lorraine had built. When the video ended, no one moved. Raymond stared at the grain of the table. Lorraine's jaw was tight. She adjusted her napkin twice. Delaney didn't look away from me. I turned to Stuart Linwood standing quietly in the corner. I handed him the manila envelope. Inside were printed transcripts, notarized documents, and audio files. "Everything is here," I said softly. "Everything they tried to bury." Lorraine broke the silence. "You're destroying this family." I tilted my head, not in anger, but in understanding. "No," I replied. "I'm just not letting you destroy me anymore." Then I turned to her directly. "I won't take you to court, not if right now you say the truth, out loud." The room was still, a storm building just beyond the walls. Truth isn't loud, but when it finally speaks, you can't unhear it. The room was so still, I could hear the hum of the speaker before I touched it. No one spoke after Grandma's voice stopped. Her words still lingered in the air, settling into every corner like dust no one wanted to claim. Lorraine folded her hands, lips drawn into a thin, unmoving line. Raymond shifted in his seat. Earl cleared his throat, then looked away. I didn't sit. I walked to the laptop, hovered my finger over the spacebar, and looked straight at Lorraine. I'm not pressing play again, I said softly but without tremor, until someone in this room says the truth out loud. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was crowded with avoidance. Raymond looked down. Delaney's voice came, barely above a whisper. She's right. Still, no apology, no confession. Lorraine didn't deny it, but she didn't speak either. I waited 5 more seconds, then closed the laptop, unplugged the speaker, placed both gently back in my bag. They weren't sorry. They were just shocked they lost. The next day, I sat across from Stuart Linwood in his office, the windows open to the sound of birds and late spring air. We reviewed the documents one final time. Once title protection is finalized, you'll be untouchable, he said. I already am, I replied. 2 weeks later, Raymond and Delaney moved out. Separately. Raymond didn't say goodbye. Delaney left a note tucked under my door. Thank you for not shutting the door completely. The apartment felt quieter after that, but not empty. The first-floor unit became something else. Something new. I repainted the trim, refinished the floors, brought in a long table with mismatched chairs, started hosting weekend baking workshops for local teens. They came in shy and unsure, left with flour on their sleeves and pride in their eyes. One girl, Elise, lingered after class one day. She ran her fingers along the worn edge of the window. So, this used to be your family's? I smiled. Still is. Just not the way they wanted it. The garden outside began blooming again. Lavender, thyme, wild strawberries. The way Grandma liked it. And then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name. The handwriting familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. Inside was a photograph, the original family portrait, uncropped. On the back, in soft cursive, she was never temporary. I held it in my lap for a long time, didn't frame it, didn't hide it either. Some wounds don't need to close to stop bleeding. They didn't break me, and maybe that's the part they never understood. How sometimes silence is not surrender, it's strategy. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt like the forgotten one, the quiet one, the one holding it all together while being left out of the story, you're not alone. I was written out, underestimated, replaced. But the truth has its own voice, and when it finally spoke, they couldn't unhear it. Legacy isn't just what's passed down, it's what we choose to protect. So now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been made to feel temporary in your own life? How did you take your place back? If this story moved you, type 1 in the comments or share which city you're watching from. If you didn't connect with it, I'd still love to hear why. Let's talk about it. And if you'd like more real, raw, and healing stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. Your voice matters here. See you in the next story.